In tutorial 1, we'll be going over some key terms for 3D printing. Now this is the MakerBot Replicator Plus. It's a 3D printer, and in 3D printing, it's a type of additive modeling that lays layer upon layer. This machine uses plastic. So to lay a layer of plastic, let it cool, then lay another one, and continue that process until your 3D model is made. Now we're going to look at some of the ways that this works and some of our key terms. The first one is the carriage. Now the carriage is the part that holds the printer head and moves it left to right, front to back, along the X and the Y axis. Now it moves because of the gantry. The gantry is a system of pulleys and belts that move it along the X and Y axis. Down here at the bottom we have a build plate. Now the build plate is where the plastic is laid. Ours, here on the MakerBot Replicator, happens to be detachable. See, I have my print here and it's built on the print plate layer after layer. We can slide it right back in. So this is the build plate. Next and very important part is the extruder. As plastic is fed through the print head, the extruder heats up very hot, and it will melt the plastic and lay it along the print bed layer by layer. So the extruder is this hot end of the print head that's connected to the carriage. We will also use a term known as build volume, and this is the physical size that you can print on your printer. Now this bed is a decent size. There's some that are bigger, there's some that are smaller, but each printer is going to be limited to what they can print by their build volume. Another key term is filament. Now filament refers to the plastic, and in our case the PLA plastic, that you use to do the printing. We can find our filament here in the back. When you lift this up, this is a roll of filament. As it goes, as it uses more and more filament, this will go down, and then eventually we'll have to replace it. Finally, purge line is another key term I want you to know. Now, when the printer starts, it'll go through some setup, and one of those setups is just getting the extruder hot enough to print the plastic. Once it is, it will run through some plastic, and then we'll lay a purge line. I'm going to remove the build plate here, or sometimes called the bed, so I can show it to you. So this is the purge line here. And the purge line often will let us know if there is any imbalances in the build plate. Sometimes it can be off, and that will usually show up on the purge line. Alright, let's look at a few more key terms that will impact us here as we do some 3D printing. The first one is resolution. After you build your 3D model, you're going to have to choose what resolution you want it to print at. The finer the resolution, the more filament it takes and the more time it takes. A 0.1 resolution is very fine. Whereas if you choose something that is a little thicker, lays thicker layers, it will use less filament, but it won't be as detailed. But it also print a lot quicker. So let's look at some examples real quick. I have spray painted this green here so that you can see the different layers and the separations. As I bring this closer, you can see that there's clear separation between the layers. This is something that is not at a particularly high resolution, but it prints fairly quickly. This can here is at a slightly higher resolution. You can still notice the layers as you look at it, but it's much more detailed. This took about 5.5 hours to print, as compared to this, which took about 2 hours. So about the same size objects, but the time in printing is a lot different. The next term I want us to know is raft. Whenever you print something, you're going to print it on a raft. This helps with adhesion to the build plate. There's nothing worse than getting halfway through a print and then it falling off the build plate and having to start all over again. There's no way to save it, you just have to print an entire new one. So here we go, I've got some chains that I've printed out here, and it's got a raft at the bottom. Now you can take your spatula and open it. I think this one's going to be easy enough, I can just do it with my fingers. So as I kind of snap this off, the raft comes off, and I've got my chains here. I have another example over here. I have the build plate that I've taken off of our Replicator Plus, and in order to get the shark off, I'm going to start by slightly bending it. You hear that snap? That means that the part of the raft has kind of popped off the build plate. That means I have a spot that I can put my spatula in. So I'm going to find that spot where I can put my spatula under there, and that pops right off. I'm also going to make sure I clean off the purge line before I put the build plate back and any other leftover residue that could be on the build plate. Okay, so I've got my Mr. Jaws off. I can just pop it around. It's good to rotate it and not just try to grab one corner and rip it entirely off, because it's just easier this way. So once you've rotated all the way around, the raft comes off fairly easily. Alright, the next structure I want to talk about is supports. Sometimes when you're building something, you can lay it flat and it could build up like this one did, but sometimes it needs supports. Sometimes there's something hanging in the air, and remember, plastic can't print on nothing. It can't print on air. So here I have a model of Rome. It's a scale model of Rome that I've shrunken down, and if you look closely, there is a lot of little loose pieces everywhere, pieces of filament, and some of it is just a byproduct of printing. Some of it is there for support reasons. For example, these are pillars, right? And each of these pillars had support structures that ran through them. So I want us to look here. This little spot here is a support structure. I'm going to use my spatula to help to get it off. There you go. And now that support structure has come off. Now there's still some at the bottom here. This takes time, right? When you build something this complex, it takes time to clean it up, to make sure all the the support structures are gone. This is a support structure over here. There's a bunch in the Colosseum right here. I'm going to probably have to take something finer than a spatula to get all these support structures off. But when you build something this complex, it takes a lot of work to get it cleaned out. But these support structures are necessary because these can't build on thin air. Another term I want you to know is bridge. Now, there is certain locations, like if we look here on the Colosseum, where it does print from pillar to pillar. An area where it prints from one pillar to the next is called a bridge, right? And that is a small gap that the plastic does print from one location to another without a support structure. Then we have overhang. Now, when we're doing a print, like I said, it can't print on air, but there is a little overhang that can happen where it won't fall immediately and just ruin your print. It lays when a layer extends outward, unsupported over the previous layer. That's called the overhang. Now I want to talk about infill, because a lot of times automatically the program will choose an infill for you, but sometimes you might want your structures to be more sturdy, or you're not as concerned about how many layers are on the inside. we look at a structure like this and we can only see the outside. We don't know what's in here. So let's see. This is one I started and then ran out of filament for, so we can see what is going on inside this structure. Right? This is called the infill, and this is pretty spread out, but we don't need it to be extremely thick on the inside here. We're not going to be dropping it a bunch. It's not in danger of breaking particularly. It's just a model. So for something that's going to be handled and used a lot, you might want a thicker infill, but for the most part, thinner infills are going to be a lot faster to print and use a lot less filament. And finally, for our last term, we're going to use the term shell. All right, the shell is the outer walls that make up the perimeter of the object. So we can see them here in this print. So all this on the internal is the interior, and then this little outside layer here is called the shell. We can make the shell thicker if we wanted to. We can make it thinner if we wanted to. The thinner the shell, the more brittle the object. But once again, prints faster and less filament. And then the thicker the shell, the more solid it will be on the outside in the structure. So those are our key terms. Make sure you review them and are prepared.